Hello, everybody. Welcome to Coffee Chats.
Hello, beautiful people.
We have some exciting podcast guests for you today. Kyra, you want to give them a sneak preview?
Oh my goodness. I'm so excited for this episode. I mean, as an author, I often wrestle with what it means to engage with podcasters and to pitch myself effectively. And the authors that we have with us are not only authors, but they're also podcasters. They have their own podcast and they've navigated the space on being on other people's podcasts. So today will be about all things podcast and we'll learn from true experts. So
you're going to hear the word podcast a lot today.
Yeah, word of the day.
100%. So we're going to bring them in and have them introduce each one of themselves one by one. So here goes nothing. Hello, everybody. Hi. How are you guys doing today?
Really good. How are you?
Great. Thank you guys for taking the time to be with us and to chat. I'm going to go ahead and do this cute little thing here and ask you to introduce yourself first.
Hello, my name is Alisha Wielfaert. I am a coach, mostly to women, sometimes men, and I work with folks going through transitions in life, business, and beyond.
Amazing. You want to tell us a little bit about your podcast as well?
Yes. Okay, so I have the Yoke and Abundance Wise Women podcast, and I work with I highlight women who are doing something creative and living from a place of abundance. So, a pretty wise topic, but it's all about just recognizing that we all have internal wisdom to share and making sure that we highlight that with one another.
That's awesome.
Kyra was recently on the podcast. That will go live next week.
She's nodding. Can't confirm.
Hailey. Hi. So I'm Hailey. I recently graduated business, which is really exciting. I'm also a coach. I also do podcasting, authorship. I started my podcast after being inspired by my book. It's all about promoting authenticity in young adults. So I use a lot of guests and different methods of storytelling to promote living an authentic life. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at.
Amazing. Thank you, Hailey. And there's John.
Hello. It's like a little roulette here, not knowing who's going to come up next. That was exciting. I'm John Saunders. I'm an executive coach, executive author coach for New Degree Press and host the Creator Community Podcast. Season 3 launched just a few hours ago. This is a show that is designed to showcase, celebrate, and elevate many of the incredible authors that have come through the New Degree Press program, along with a new alumni series we launched just a few days ago. So a great program to understand the journey, what it's like to write a book, how to fit it into your life, and to delve deeply into the many, many incredible stories that have come through New Degree Press publishing.
Did you practice that?
No.
That was a really great pitch, John. Thank you so much for sharing. All right, you guys. So now we have questions for all of you. And I'm actually going to rearrange us so that you three are all on top. Look at that. Perfect. So first question, and I'm excited for the answers to these. Why did you decide to launch your podcast first? I'm going to mute myself now.
Can I jump in here? Well, first I have to say, this whole live thing is really interesting because I'm so nervous and I don't normally get nervous to record a podcast. So I just want to share that. But my podcast, my work started actually as a blog series where I would highlight women who would do something creative and live from a place of abundance. And then as I was doing that work, it turned into my coaching business. And so it just seemed like the conversations that I was having needed to go deeper and to a broader audience. It's like the conversations we were having in the coaching sessions, I wanted people to know that they weren't as alone as maybe they thought they were. So that was an aspect of it. And then another aspect was growing the community. And it just seemed like a really natural way to grow the community and continue the conversations outside of the work that I was doing.
Awesome. I can jump in. So I originally started my podcast, ironically, because I am petrified of public speaking. Like, I am completely scared of it. My heart is like pounding right now. But it was something that was emphasized throughout at least my time in the program, was putting yourself out there and doing a lot of speaking engagements to promote your book. It didn't really start from that kind of place. It was more so for me to like kind of promote my passion for authenticity through a different medium, because some people just don't enjoy reading books. Like, I have a lot of friends who have supported me along the way, but they don't enjoy reading. They would rather listen instead. So I kind of pushed myself past my comfort zone and decided to get into podcasting just to improve that skill. But also it was a really phenomenal way for me to network. Like, I have made so many incredible connections just through podcasting. And honestly, I think deep down, the more intent behind it was to be able to learn from people through the art of storytelling. I know I had Mackenzie and Kyra on within the past week, and I learned so much from them. And every time I come off like a recording, I always inspired by everybody who hops on. So I think now more than anything, it's about being able to leverage those connections and learn through people. But originally it did start with this public speaking idea.
And what about you, John?
Thanks. Working with New Degree Press, publishing my own book through the program, I found one of the hardest things to do as a new author was to get that first interview. And after talking with the folks that run New Degree Press, Brian Bees and others, we had a really interesting discussion around what if we could help coach, train, and manufacture that opportunity for many folks, and also, give a louder voice to NDP out there in the media world with a podcast. And it's been a really awesome journey of helping people get up to speed, figure out how to launch and run a podcast, how to run better and more effective interviews, create a YouTube channel, all of these things. There's so many moving parts to it. And actually, Alisha was kind enough to help me run one of the training sessions earlier this year, which was awesome. And it's just really been a lot of fun to get to dig in and learn all these stories. And I think I heard a great quote from an executive a number of years ago. And he said, when I want to learn something, I go and read like 5 books. And I thought, gosh, that's a little bit excessive, right? But what I've learned through this journey, through writing and as a podcast host, what it does is if you read one book, you get one perspective on something that's really well researched, right? But if you read several, you get a bunch and a really much more well-rounded perspective. What's great about the podcast is in like 30 minutes, you get sort of the cliff notes of all of these stories. So it's actually a really brilliant way to learn that I never really thought about. It's been super fun and really great from my perspective as a host. And I think the authors I've gotten, we as an organization, as a group, we've gotten tremendous feedback on, thank you so much, because talking about a book and writing a book are 2 totally different skills, and it really takes practice.
I mean, I couldn't agree more with that. And something that all of you mentioned was the podcasting as an opportunity to mobilize community members, broaden networks, and further much needed conversations. So bearing that in mind, as you guys navigate the podcast space, what do you look for in your podcast guests in terms of in terms of the conversations you guys want to spark in your listeners?
I'll jump in here. So, first of all, it feels like hosting a podcast is like the greatest hall pass to just be like, hey, I have a podcast. I'd love to have you on. So you get to meet essentially whoever you're brave enough to ask to be on the show, which is so exciting to me because I'm really I'm very socially awkward. I'm an introvert, and I can be extroverted, but it takes a lot of effort. And so this is such a great pass for me to invite people on. But what I'm really looking for is someone that seems interesting. I think we might have good chemistry on screen. And most importantly, they're going to connect with my audience and have something that my audience really wants to hear or learn about.
Yeah, for me, I don't really actually directly message people and ask them to come on. Like originally, that's how I kind of started. I was like finding people who I wrote about originally. I ended up having them on my podcast. So I already had that network. But what I started doing was I just invited people to like apply to be a guest. Basically, it was just a DM. Just message me if you're interested. Tell me why you'd be interested and what topic you want to talk about. And what I really seek out is like how unique and niche the topic is. Sometimes people want to talk about things like mental health, but that's too broad of a topic nowadays. Like, you know, you could go so much more into that. So I kind of see like how niche the topic is that they want to talk about, but I also see how comfortable are they in being vulnerable. You know, like I've had some episodes in the past where like, you know, they're kind of repeating things that they read on like Psychology Today, and it wasn't about their own personal story. So now I'm a little bit more picky about like, are they going to open up and share their own stories? But other than that, like I often have anyone who reaches out often hops on. It's just more so like me emphasizing to them that I really want them to be vulnerable when they hop on and share, because a story really does support a lesson and a fact. So
yeah, for the New Degree Press program, it's a little bit different in that we actually do auditions. So we sort of take that idea there to maybe a different level, and it's part of the training process. And the criteria we look for as they go through the auditions, concise, creative, compelling are really the three areas we focus on. You know, can you tell your story and make it memorable in 2 minutes? And again, that's not easy to do. You've just spent a year working on a book, you know, in long form with tons of time to edit. Now you have to say it live in front of somebody, which is really interesting. Is it creative? Are you helping us feel that story and dive in deeply? And is it compelling? Am I going to remember this? You know, did you structure it in a way that gives it a compelling and memorable, if you will, structure to it, so I can actually remember what you took away or the key elements you want me to take away. And that's really what we look for. And it's been really fascinating going through that journey and seeing some people really embrace the moment, and others find it as a really great learning experience to figure out, oh, wow, I've got some work I need to do here. But it's been fantastic going through that process of learning and helping people get a little more, find that blend between structure and storytelling to help people follow along, but also rope them in emotionally.
100%. That training is super valuable because then it helps the authors to adequately prepare for other speaking events, for their next, after their first, for their second, their third, their fourth, and to like land those other things and get used to talking about their book in shorter form ways.
I would tell you, Mackenzie, that is such a great point. And that's really the idea, not to get on this show necessarily because there's 150, 200 authors, so we can't do that many episodes. But really, as I often say to everyone, don't think about this as your sort of number one podcast. Think about it as one of 15 to 20 you're going to get on to go promote your book. And it takes practice. I mean, when we see celebrities do it on TV, they make it look so simple because they've done it 100 times, right? Yep. And we take that for granted sometimes.
I actually have a quick follow-up question for you guys. So you guys just sort of talked through what it means for you to have a guest on your show. But as I've noticed, each of your individual shows have themes to them. And so how much does your theme or general sphere of consideration that you have on your podcast dictate who you have on?
That's a really great question. So anything that has to do with creativity or entrepreneurship or abundance or positive psychology, those are really my themes. But every now and then someone will pique my interest so much so, and they're really outside of that. but that doesn't stop me from having them on the show if it's going to be valuable to my audience. So for example, earlier this year, I read this incredible book, Running with Sherman, about this ultra runner who gets this ragtag group of donkeys together, literally donkeys, and he and his wife and some other folks like run with these donkeys. And so it was an incredible book. He's a very famous guy in the running world. And I reached out to him and I was like, hey, it's the Yoke and Abundance Wise Women podcast, but I'd really love to interview you. And he got right back to me and he was on. And it's one of my favorite episodes because it was just such a great, valuable story. And so sometimes it can be outside of the theme if it's going to be valuable.
Yeah, I can kind of second that as well. Like, I find that the topic I chose in nature is quite broad, like authenticity. Like, you can literally talk about literally anything as long as you're vulnerable. So I've had a lot of diversity. Like, a lot of it ends up being in the health and wellness kind of category because that's just kind of how it has naturally led to. But I'm extremely open as long as the story that they're going to tell is really raw. And I also find that like I'm more appealed to people who've actually never been on podcasts before. I find that like it's a brand new perspective that has yet to be shared. So sometimes I'll ask that. Like, I definitely have had tons of people on who've been on several podcasts, which is great in terms of like the practices that they've had, but there's something more raw about somebody who hasn't been on a podcast before that I'm personally appealed to. But again, like mine is super, super broad. I literally can talk about anything, which is kind of nice because it's good to shake things up a bit.
The beauty of having your own show, you can do whatever you want.
Exactly. I highly recommend starting one.
The themes for the New Degree Press show are really about getting to understand the author, their journey, their story. But one of my favorite questions I like to ask people is, what was an unexpected surprise for you in this journey? And everybody has a story to that. And oftentimes it's related to people came out of the woodwork to support me in such a big way. I can't believe it. Or, oh my gosh, I'm now connected to this person I never thought I would have been connected to. Jen Marr, the first alumni episode we just did the other day. She connected with a senior executive at Time Warner and helped her get her book off the ground and get it published, get the fundraising done properly. She raised $71,000 for her book, which was totally aligned with her business on coaching. She just got invited to the White House Development Leadership Program to do a coaching session on it. So, I mean, talk about unexpected surprises from a book. And by the way, she found this AOL woman because she was walking through Target as she was going through her book journey, learning, growing, developing her idea. And she saw a book that sort of felt like one she wanted it to look like physically, looked at who was on it and sent them a note on LinkedIn. And now they're friends and have co-authored this book. I mean, people love a creative journey and it's so fun to see how much people get behind it and support it. So those are really the big themes that we go after there.
I'm reeling. That's incredible.
Yes, we're all sitting here with our mouths agape.
It's a great episode. She raised $71,000 in her pre-sale campaign.
I thought I was doing great in my pre-sale campaign. That's just insane.
Oh,
you're doing fantastic. And
you are.
I love that, John, you use the word journey so much because that word is actually in our next question. How has having the podcast shaped your own book journey? Because all of you are authors who have podcasts and have been on podcasts. And so how do you feel that the podcast that you currently run has shaped your book journey?
Should I go first this time since we keep
you can
going left
anyone
to right?
This is just a round table.
I would go back to my Cliff Notes comment that I get, which is, running, working with the authors and coaching them, but also doing executive coaching outside of here. I get to capture all these really brilliant ideas and short snippets from people that I've actually applied in real time to coaching sessions that I've done in the executive leadership world, which has been really awesome. One of my favorites that I just used recently, I was interviewing Jennifer Davis, who wrote a book on called Well-Made Decisions or Decisions Well Made. And one of her best ideas, I thought, was as she approaches leadership change initiatives, she has people write out a 5-star customer review for 3-6 months from now. What does that 5-star review look like for our clients if we implement our employees or whoever the important constituents are? What does that 5-star review look like 3 months from now? And how do we back into that? What do we have to execute on effectively to get someone to write that review? And so there's a real-time example of what I used just a few weeks ago that was really well received by a client. So I love the sort of deep learning I get to use from it as a host. As an author, I go on shows myself. I've been on a couple dozen now. It's just a great way, I find, to meet new people, network, and grow your own audience as you go on these shows and get to promote it and cross promote with these hosts, which is fantastic.
Yeah, I can jump in. So for me, I wrote my book first before I launched a podcast. So kind of like my book journey shaped my podcast in a sense. Obviously, like my book does use the power of storytelling to convey different lessons on how you can live an authentic life. And basically all I did was I just continued the story. I just continued the conversation around what my book was all about. By discussing different topics related to authenticity. But at the end of the day, like this whole journey has allowed me just to connect like with so many people. Like it's unreal how many connections and like the path I've been put on because of podcasting and writing my book. Like I don't even think I'd be in the career that I am now without it. Like I literally tell everyone like I can attribute all of where I am today because of this writing journey. So I can definitely say my book has shaped pretty much everything that I'm doing now.
So awesome. The book journey, it's new for me and it's amazing already, right? But for me, the podcast, it's certainly, I am a brave person, but podcasting has made me braver. I've had to flex my bravery muscle over and over and over again. And it feels like I did 60 interviews for my book in April and May, almost before the book program started, knowing that I was going to need to do that. And I don't know that I would have been as proficient with Zoom and recording and being brave enough to ask some harder questions if I hadn't had 2 years worth of practice on my own podcast of getting to do that with folks. So for me, it's prepared me to be brave with the book as well.
So beautifully said, each and every one of you. I mean, yes. That was not really like a further addition to anything, but just to consolidate like the fact that it's been a space of empowerment for each of you, and also a place where you are allowing the community that you're accessing to be empowered. And so, on a related note, because again, all of these are about podcasts.
But I like how we're transitioning in questions from like, okay, podcast host, author, and now our next question is podcast guest.
Exactly. It's all about perspective in relation to the core. So, how has becoming a podcast host changed your approach from being a podcast guest? Because you're technically a podcast guest right now.
I can jump in a little bit here. Like I said before, like I guess my experience, the first time I ever did a podcast kind of inspired me to get into a podcast because I completely choked. Like I freaked out. I made them start over. I was like, oh my God, I literally cannot speak. I'm just so nervous. Like and afterwards I was so humiliated because I was so nervous. Like right now I'm way calmer than I was back then. So that kind of ignited that fire of getting involved in podcasting. But for now, I guess in terms of being a host, I feel like, I guess with being now, I feel like I can be a lot more conversational as a guest because I know when I come on to podcast now, I want to engage with the hosts and ask them questions as well. I think that's what has really changed. I think, when I have guests come on, I tell them to ask me questions because it's important to be conversational rather than interviewee. But at the end of the day, it has helped me substantially in terms of like how nervous I get with public speaking. I think it's important to try to do both sides because, you know, you open up your perspective when you do get on other podcasts as well with different questions and different approaches. So I think it's good to get on podcasts, but also start a podcast too.
Anybody else have any thoughts on this?
My head is swimming with thoughts right now in so many different directions, and my heart is still going pitter patter and pounding a little bit, which is so bizarre. But I think that it's made me want to be a better guest. So thinking about how do I help promote someone else's show? How are we going to help each other engage audiences? You know, how can I serve that audience when I'm on? Like, I just have a very different perspective. And so now here, I think I'm trying to live up to my own expectations, right? I think that's where that pitter patter in the heart comes from, where I'm like, oh, this is so stressful. But yeah, I think that's a big part of it, is just wanting to engage with everybody in a really authentic and true way as well.
I love that, because John actually has some really great advice about this that he likes to share with our authors. Do you want to share it with our audience here?
Oh God, could you give me more of a lead in than that? I'm not picking up what you're putting down right now.
Yes, the be helpful.
Yes, thank you.
Yes,
you know, for me, it's a big part of it. It's about connecting. It's about learning your own story. And I'll share a thought before I go there, which is I found incredibly powerful for me in my journey as an author. And then I think it leads into your question more, which is I was on a podcast very early on, before I even had my book really sorted out. It was another author who said, hey, I'm launching a podcast. Do you want to be on? And at first I thought, I don't know. No, it's a brand new show. And then I thought, wait a minute, I need to start doing this and practicing. And by the sheer act of answering questions in a formal capacity about my book and my journey, it really forced me to think through it. And it also, more importantly, as he pressed me on certain issues, got me to really realize what I was very passionate about in my book. And I remember the experience vividly, in that, like, I felt the hair on my arms going up as he was pressing on questions. And I was like, no, this is how I feel about this. And it really empowered me to continue to tell my story and dig deeper into the topics I wanted to cover on my book. It helped me a lot to just kind of change that mindset about telling my story and what I want to tell. And then fast forwarding to your point, Mackenzie, and then as I've gone through the journey, and maybe to Alisha's point too as well, in connecting with people, building relationships, being authentic, at the end of every podcast I go on, I do the exact same thing, which is a 4-step exit after they turn off the recording. Be thankful, be curious, be helpful, be gone. And it's, hey, thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed your show. Presumably that's true. It has been every case so far. I love to be curious. Like, what stories am I resonating with you? And for me, that's data collection. Which stories should I continue to tell and refine and try to make better if needed? And last one, how can I help you? And I get 2 very common responses to that one. 3. One is, I don't know. 2, no one's ever asked me that before, literally. 3, do you know any good guests do you know someone who would be a good guest for my show? And so that's really given me the privilege of being able to refer, I don't know, maybe a dozen shows to different authors now and friends, which has been great. And that conversation takes 3 or 4 minutes, and it massively deepens relationships, and you help 2 other people out. And I've had so many great outcomes from that I'm happy to share, but I'll pause there.
I did want to add a point about this idea of helping out the podcast host. I don't think a lot of people realize how much work goes into developing like a 30-minute episode. Like, I'm one person. I don't have a production team, and I'm sure you guys can totally relate to this. I don't have the most fancy equipment or anything like that, but it does take, the recording itself, the editing, all that kind of stuff, and then publishing and promoting probably takes 4 to 5 hours, and like, it's unpaid work, right? So for me, like, something I really get personally, and I'm gonna be frank, personally annoyed with, is if someone doesn't cross promote. And I think if you are also looking for ways to help the podcast host, like cross promoting is definitely the bare minimum. So it's also good for you. It's good for, say if you're younger, it's good for your resume. It's good to post on LinkedIn, Facebook. It's a really good accomplishment to get on a podcast. So I don't see why not promoting it, but I wanted to add that as a point.
That's a great point. Yeah. Why would you not want to promote a podcast that you were on? Like, what an opportunity.
I know, and I've had guests not do it, and like I've had to harass them to do it. I'm like, please, like, just why not? Like, you did so good, like, just share it. But yeah, it's interesting. But that's something that I would highly emphasize to authors who are trying to get on podcasting. Like, really emphasize like how you can help them like promote it and get it out there to other audiences.
I can relate to that so much.
It's brutal. Like, just share it. You have an incredible story to share, and I'm sure your own audience will want to listen to it, and it benefits the podcast host who's getting a new audience. So it's yeah.
I would add one thought to that for people that are looking to get on shows, your first one or anyone in the series. This is something Alisha and I talked about in the workshop for the authors a month or two ago. Put it in your email to the host. Hey, I'd love to be on your show. Here's why. I love your show. It makes my message would resonate with your audience. By the way, I have this many followers on whatever social media platforms you use, and I'd love to share your message, your story with my audience. Like, put it out there. Put it in writing.
Huge part of the pitch. Absolutely. Yeah. And even, I wouldn't even say like, don't worry about if your following is large or not, because your podcast, speaking as someone who's a guest, right, could be the best episode that they ever have. And you never know. And it could get them a ton of views, and it could really help them out. And so that's what you're looking for in your pitch to them, is you show the podcast host that you paid attention to what it is that they're podcasting about and how you can provide a perspective to their audience, because every podcast has a specific audience.
So true.
So I actually have a follow-up question about that, particularly so I think, as we've been saying, audience alignment is key. Alignment in interest rather than just alignment in size is key. But I guess my follow-up question would be, for people who are in the process of looking to be on podcasts, how soon should they be thinking about doing that? Like, because I know that different podcasts follow different timelines, but is it better to start thinking about it sooner rather than later, with the expectation that it'll take a minute for an episode to be unleashed? That kind of cadence.
So I'm going to jump right in on this one. So for me, depending on where I am in my recording, I could have 4 to 8 podcasts queued up, and I release each week. So that's 4 to 8 episodes that are already queued up. So let's say somebody has a book that's coming out in the spring. They want to contact me now, and they want to ask me if they can send me, the digital copy of their book so that I have time to read it or review it before I have them on, because that's going to take I want to be prepared for that interview with them. And then it's going to take us a little time to get it scheduled. And then it could be 4 to 8 weeks before that episode airs. So we're looking at potentially a 3 to 6 month period of time, depending on what it is we're going to be talking about. So the sooner you can get on the radar, the better.
Yeah, definitely ask too, because some people are on different timelines. Like, hey, when do you expect this to be published? That's something, it's good to get on a podcast regardless, like even if, it is published way down the road, but it's always good to ask. Like for me, my turnaround time is really fast because I usually do like a recording the week of and I get it out within like 2-ish weeks. But I know I've been on podcasts where like it didn't get released until a year later. So I think it's really important to remember that and to keep that in mind. And I think with those podcasts that get published way, way down the road, I think those ones are really important to really, really prepare for, because like at that point in time, you've probably grown already so much. So you don't want to like not look as like professional. Like, I guess like, yeah, if you're way down the road, if you know what I mean, like if you're going way down the road, like you're going to want to prepare a lot more for that, because at the end of the day, you might change your thoughts and that kind of stuff by then. So you wouldn't want to really share something that isn't a reflection of you at that point in time.
And the climate of the world could be completely different.
Yes.
The information that you're sharing, you'll want to make sure it's evergreen. Like that's a really good point. It's never been something I've thought to ask up front. It's more of something I find out after the fact, unless sometimes I'll meet a podcast host who wants to do like a preliminary chat where they'll go, okay, yeah, so this will be great. And I probably want to release it in February. Is that okay with you? Like, but I've never thought to ask. And I think that's a really great point to ask, because I have been put in contact with someone in May, recorded in September, and it was published in February. Like long, like not even that there was any hemming and hawing or anything. It was just that they have a lot of guests and they schedule things out way in advance.
That's crazy. I get too excited to wait. So like when I get something around, I'm like, oh my gosh, I need to publish this right now. So that's why I always, because like I know I'll get too excited and then I'll promote it. Like I'll publish one episode, then publish that one 3 days later. And it just doesn't work. I just, it's a self-control thing. But
by the time it's around and gets released again, I'm like, oh, I forgot I did that.
And sometimes we don't know. Like, if I have a lot in the queue, if one episode that I thought was going to go out is maybe too similar to the one that just went out, I need to think about what that content positioning looks like and switch it up in a different way. So I might want something to go out and it can't yet. So that we can get into trouble like that too.
Do you think about bingeable content when it comes to the order of the podcasts you put together?
I try. I don't know that I achieved that, but I sure try.
I would add one thought to that for people, reaching out in this thing. Like there are many factors that can get you on a show and many factors that cannot get you on a show. So don't take it personally if it doesn't always work out. That's one thought I would add to that. And two, you just don't know their cadence. I was on a show last week. I met these people a month ago through a referral from another author, actually. It's a pretty well followed show, and they're not going to post it till February. Mm-hmm. So again, like you just don't know the timeline. So if you're thinking about shows and when to do it or whatever, I would say yesterday is your best day to do it, or today, whichever comes first, whichever is more easy to access. But yeah, you just don't know what's going to drive it. You don't know when your message is going to resonate. You don't know how long it's going to take.
Mm-hmm.
Very true. I think that so much helpful advice was shared with you guys there, because it's better to know what the timeline is sooner rather than later. And also, like, the more evergreen content you present in a podcast, the better. Because I am familiar with, and I'm sure you guys as podcast hosts are very familiar with, how there will be people who have podcast releases contingent around other things like book releases, concert dates, etc., etc. And another component that I find interesting is that in being evergreen, of course, you want to be mindful of the person that you'll be by the time an episode comes out. Like to Hailey's point, but if you focus on evergreen things and you don't mention things like, oh, like this is happening next week. If you're going to say something as temporally specific, you should probably say at the time of this recording, which is something that my podcast host friends among you guys have shared with me, just so that the audience doesn't get confused. And so the next question that we have, because again, you guys have done such an excellent job of explaining what it means for you guys to have podcasts. Our question for you is, what's been your favorite moment on your podcast so far?
I can start. I thought about this question earlier, and my favorite moment was I had an episode surrounding men's mental health, and the individual who hopped on and talked about it, he actually started crying. And I thought that was probably the most empowering experience I've ever had on my podcast, because he took vulnerability to the next level and really showed how that topic really impacted his life. And so I think for me, giving him the platform to be able to share and to see that emotional reaction and for him to be completely transparent about his story. I think that was probably my extreme favorite moment on my podcast, just because of that vulnerability piece.
I feel like this question maybe has the chance to get me into a little bit of trouble with some people. So I'm going to say this, that I have many favorite moments on the podcast that I've experienced so far. One in particular that stands out to me at this moment in time was I was interviewing Naima Olatunji, whose episode is actually coming out tomorrow. And I didn't pick this story because of that, but it's kind of ironic. You know, she told the story, kind of to Hailey's point, where at 49 years old, she was dating this guy and they broke up, and she found herself on her hands and knees crying and begging for him to take her back. Oh. And it just blew me away when she shared it. And I went completely off script there. And I try to do that often, but you know, instead of going on to the next question, which I think would have been very awkward, I asked her, I said, you know, I said, how did you find the power in that moment to even move forward? And that just turned into this really interesting conversation about how she did do that through the support of friends, through the support of community, through support of therapy, and really digging into that story, which I don't think she had any idea to share that story on that call. So it was really interesting to sort of dig into that really raw moment, kind of to Hailey's idea there. So that was a pretty interesting one for me.
Off script can be the most fun.
Oh, for sure.
It's such a great story, John. Thank you.
Thanks.
So like John, I feel like there's so many moments that I could point to, so many stories I want to tell you all. But there's this one, I'm a recovering people pleaser, and that can get me into trouble as a podcast host sometimes, because I do this thing where I want to win my guest over. And it was probably the podcast I was one of the most nervous to do. It was with Sonia Renee Taylor, who wrote this book called The Body Is Not an Apology. And she's just an incredible human being. And I was terrified. She's been interviewed by Brene Brown. She's an incredible writer. And I definitely was intimidated, and I wanted to get it right, because to me, she was a big deal. She was someone I really respected. And so I found myself just trying so hard that it was kind of awkward in the beginning. And then I finally hit this moment where I felt like I had won her over, and we connected on a deep level about ancestors. And so it felt really good to me to hit that point where I'm like, oh, I found that connection point. And what was interesting was that folks told me that they could feel the connection in that interview. And that made me feel like I'd done my job as a host, aside from the awkward people-pleasing beginning of it.
I do have a follow-up question for you guys. And I think this is particularly interesting as you guys have established your podcast platform and it continues to evolve. Because this is something that I've been wondering as a podcast guest too. And Hailey actually alluded to it earlier. But what is the editing process like? And how did you decide to strike the balance between I guess something that feels more casual and has elements of liveness versus how polished it sounds?
The way Hailey's eyes became so wide.
I guess I can jump in based on my reaction.
Please do.
Similar to editing my book, it's the most tedious, actually not even, it's way worse. It's the most tedious thing ever. It's really good because you get to really listen in and really absorb what you said. That's the benefit. But just, editing out the breathing, it takes a very long time. I know 10 minutes usually takes me an hour. So it's very, very tedious work. It's, sometimes it's really good because sometimes I get into it and it's you get into that flow of editing, but at the same time, it's not you're changing a lot of words. At least for me, I don't change very much of what my guests say unless they explicitly ask me to. That's why I try to keep it more raw and real. But yeah, it's very, very tedious.
Well, and it's an important question to ask too, because I've been on podcasts sometimes where they just don't do any editing. And so I like to know, because live, that's fine. It's like doing it live, right? Sometimes if there's mistakes, that can be what makes it beautiful. But I like to know ahead of time that if I choose to start over something that I said for the sake of, hey, let's just cut out that last part, I'm going to start my answer again here. I like to know that if I'm able to do that or not.
Yeah, it's so fair. Like I've every time I mess up, usually every time, like it's me who messes up. I've done 70 plus episodes on my own show and I literally mess up every time. I think that kind of gives comfort to the guests if the host messed up. I don't know if you guys have felt that, but I know I was on a podcast before and the host messed up and I was like, okay, this is chill now because they've already messed up, so I can too. But yeah, the editing process, it's an interesting experience, but definitely makes you really think about what's being said too.
I feel so lucky in this instance because I outsource this. I have an incredible, just shout out to my editor, to Monty Johnson of FX Media. He is incredible. He puts up with my bull sometimes. I don't typically like direct him on the editing. Like he makes sure there's no breathing or weird like hiccups or, burps or things like that. And the that just happened, he would probably, massage that a little bit. But for the most part, we don't do a lot of other editing than that.
Yeah, I like to not do a lot because it can make it sound jumpy. So I try, actually the software you use, which would be a great sponsor for the show, to script, just putting it out there. They let you take out all the ums and uhs. You can literally select all of them and just delete them. But sometimes they'll make it sound jumpy. So I'll actually put them back in to make it sound just more natural and smooth. So you just say, as opposed to this weird little hiccup that you get. And then there's also the case where we do have mistakes and I let people know that. And there was actually one instance where somebody was super nervous and I could just tell. So I actually made a mistake at the front just to show them how easy it was to stop and start over. And I could just see like the blood pressure in their body going down as I did that, kind of to Hailey's point. So it's great to have editing rights, I would say, but fortunately we don't have to do it a whole lot. But it is painful work, at least for me. If it's not work that sort of like energizes your soul, I have to do the first draft editing. You say, all right, here's the minutes of the show I want and don't want. And then there are many steps beyond that. Captions, really painful to put captions together. Sorry to anyone out there who has to do captions. Maybe you like it, but I was able to outsource that, fortunately. But I do have to create like whatever the 30 minutes of the show are. I have to pick those. There's kind of no getting around that. And that part I kind of like. But fortunately, the rest of it, I get some help with.
It's nice to know that you're talking to a person, like you guys were mentioning about the making mistakes or just any of that, really, because it makes the whole podcasting experience that much easier and also that much better for the listener, because editing is important to the listener as well as just having engaging content. Because if the quality of the microphone is no good, people will get bored or agitated and not want to listen to the rest of your podcast or future shows even, and they might navigate over somewhere else. So all of those tiny little details are important and stressful.
I'll tell you, Mackenzie, I was on a show it was a while ago, I'll say, and they clearly did. I was really excited. They really liked it, gave me great feedback. And then when I finally heard the audition, there was so much editing that had all those little hiccups in it. And it just sounded, it doesn't sound great when you have those, when you take out every little mistake. Yeah, it can get really choppy where your voice kind of races all of a sudden. It just sounds bad.
There's a happy medium with the editing.
It sounds like an art form for sure. Well, so we do have one more planned question for you guys, but leading into that, audience members watching, if you have a question for any of our panelists, feel free to drop it in the comments over here. And we will pull it onto the screen and ask our panelists and continue this lovely conversation here. So our last planned question for you is, what's been your favorite moment of your book journey so far? We ask this to every panelist guest, and this is just coming back to you as an author. Would love to know. Not everybody at once.
All right. Well, I'll jump in. So I'm still I'm in it, right? Like I'm still in my book journey. I don't know where the book journey is supposed to end because
it never ends. You're always in it.
A lifelong journey.
Yeah. So I've done first draft and I'm about to close out my my pre-sale campaign. And what's been so cool about the pre-sale campaign is, I hit the point in the draft where I just kind of felt stupid. Like I had nothing more to say, even though I knew that wasn't true. But I knew that there were maybe a missing chapter, and there were like major holes. And in marketing it for the pre-sale campaign, I've gotten really clear about what the holes are, and am so excited to jump back into the revisions and editing process, especially because now I know who I'm writing to. There's like 225 people that I'm writing to, and I know who they are. And so it's really exciting to know that like these words are going to them. So that's what's been most exciting for me.
Yeah, I can jump in here. For me, it's, obviously when I got my book for the first time, it was like December 2019. Like it was probably like one of the happiest days ever. I literally cried. It was like just such a monumental accomplishment for my life. So it was like that moment itself was like, it's so precious to me. But in terms of my book journey, like you said, like it never ever ends. It continues. It's literally putting me on a completely different path than I ever thought. Like, I was a business student. I was planning on going to like marketing or something like that, which I kind of sort of am. But it did push me on a path more towards coaching, helping youth, mental health, all these different things I never even considered before. And so I think the best part about my book journey is just the people I've been able to meet. Like, I swear, like even just 1 year after like the pandemic, I met thousands of people. I can confidently say it's been thousands because of this book. And, before I was extremely introverted, very, very shy. And now like it's allowed me to connect in ways I never thought I could connect with people before. And it's just been such an incredible experience. And I'm just happy that the journey is going to continue, especially through podcasting and potentially future books down the road and any other medium. But for me, it's just definitely been the people I've been able to connect with.
I would say not only the people I've been able to connect with literally all over the world. I've now got a new friend in Finland, Latin America, in Europe. It's been just around DC where I live, just some incredible people that I thought, why would this person ever return an outreach for me? Could I interview you for my book or something like this? And they did, which was really, really awesome. And some pretty high profile people that were willing to do that. And then I think more importantly for the book and book journey, how much they were willing to help. Hey, I'm kind of stuck on this. What would you do here if you were me to market my book or to do whatever it might be? And that landed me and opened up so many doors. But I would tell you that no one's sitting around wondering right now how they can help Alisha sell more books in her pre-sale, except for Alisha, right? But if you make that outreach, it's pretty amazing how much people are willing to help you out with that very targeted approach. And so I think for me, it was just how much people are willing to help, and then seeing what the outcome of that can be. And people have gotten me speaking slots at international conferences that, they said, hey, can you do this? And I was like, are you sure you're reaching out to the right person? And then, seeing that first real check coming through the mail, and if you will, for coaching sessions was a pretty big highlight for me to realize, wow, I've got a story here to tell, and people find it valuable. So many highlights, I guess, would be the moral of that story for me.
My cat had some additional thoughts after that. I don't know if you heard him.
Thank you, Mr. Whiskers, for that further support.
Awesome. So we have one question that came in. Here it is. And this is actually writing from Asoma. She is under a different name today, different account, but wants to know, what's the best approach to land competitive podcasts? I like this question because I also kind of want to dig into like, what's the idea of competitive? Like what makes a podcast competitive? What makes it great? And how can you tell that a podcast does really well? This is a question I often ask myself. Like if I get outreach from someone and I want to look into their podcast and they don't have like a website where they actively say like, these are our stats, I find it hard as a guest to find the numbers of like, what are their downloads? What are their rankings? Like how active is their and engaged is their audience? And for me, that's what competitive sounds like. A really popular podcast that isn't booking a lot of guests because there's a lot of people in line.
There's a lot of questions in there, but I think some interesting ones. One is hiring a publicist. That's something anyone can do. Obviously, there's a cost to that. And, we've had a number of authors do that, and we're getting ready to offer some further services around that for future authors, which I think will be really interesting to try out. Two, there's a service out there I've found pretty impactful called matchmaker.fm. They call themselves Tinder for podcasts is their tagline, which I think is really funny, but I've actually landed a few good shows through that. But honestly, the big one for me has been referrals and networking. When I ask someone who would be a good, when I ask someone how I can help you, and they say who would be a good guest for my show, and I offer them one, and then actually connect those two people, and they're good guests on their show. I've had that author then refer me to other shows, and sometimes the host of the show refer me to friends of theirs who host podcasts to say, hey, this John guy was great on my show. Why don't you have him on your show? And that slowly has, the quality of shows I've been on has gone up and up and up, which has been great. And I have not hired a publicist. I've really taken the networking and referral approach, and it's had a really positive impact for me.
That's a good strategy.
Thanks. The price is right.
Yes.
There's so many questions that I have within this particular question. But the first thing is it doesn't really matter how big someone's podcast is. It matters what the alignment is. So does that show really align with your message? And if it does, and you want to reach out to them, you could do like something interesting, like slide up in their DMs and send them a video message on Instagram if you want to get really creative. You could reach out to them and let them know that you've listened to the show, let them know why you love that show, why you think it's a good alignment, and then bullet point the 3 stories that you can tell that will connect to their audience, and then let them know what you'll do to promote the show. Just keep it simple, and follow back up in a couple weeks because we all get busy.
Follow up is hugely important.
Alisha, thank you for adding that point. Alisha just described a template that we co-created that is, if you're a new degree press author, you can easily find on the internal system that we use. That's out there. But I would tell you, to piggyback that thought, this goal alignment thing is so important. And I would tell you it's the same for marketing your book. If you want to create leverage in any capacity, how does the audience win? How does that partner win? Whatever they might be, podcast, media outlet, bookstore, whatever it is, and how do you win? Thinking about it in that order, I think it not only helps you find better people to reach out to and have good alignment with, but how to frame that message more appropriately. Because if you just call them and say, hey, I wrote a book, you should have me on your show, nobody really cares. They care that you can help grow and engage your audience. So Alisha, thank you for triggering that thought in this conversation you and I've had many times about how do you create that alignment. It goes for podcasts, it goes for many, many things to create leverage for your book. And I couldn't agree more with that. Thank you.
And something I have to add here that's just mind-blowing to me that I think is really interesting that we don't realize as listeners of podcasts is that sometimes these shows that get the higher downloads, that have massive listeners, guests pay to be on those shows. So keep that in mind too, that there's often a pay-to-play aspect. And us first-time authors, we may not realize that going into it, but that is something to just keep in mind depending on who you're pitching and why you're pitching them.
I have a follow-up question to that. When is it okay to pay to be a guest? Because generally when someone says to me, hey, would love to have you on, like they reached out to me, they want to have me on, and then they're like, by the way, I want $25. I'm like, I mean, I'm not saying like $25 is like no small change or huge or anything, but just like any money above zero is unusual for me in the experience that I've had.
So let me get this straight. They reached out to you and then told you it was $25.
Yes.
So I'll tell you something really not great that I do. I get so many inquiries. It's overwhelming. And some of the inquiries just seem downright disrespectful, to be perfectly honest. And so when I get the ones that don't say anything about my show, the person doesn't have anything that makes them unique. It's clearly a publicist reaching out who's doing a very poor job. I'll respond with, yeah, I'd love to have you on the show. It's $1,000 for an episode. And I've never had anybody take me up on that. But that's the point.
That's awesome.
That's the point.
I've never heard of that, of people, like, I was just thinking, like, I've never heard of guests being charged. Like, I kind of think that that's kind of a little bit odd, because you'd think that they would monetize through ads rather than having the guest pay, because it's almost like having an honor to have a certain person, especially if like they're bigger and that some people have to pay. I think that you can get around not having to pay, get on several different podcasts. So it's same with, like, you know, going on a different route, like getting book reviewers. Like if they asked you to pay, no, you can find someone else who would do it for free. I think what the biggest thing that authors, because I get a lot of messages from authors, because like Eric or Brian or whoever is telling them that I always look for guests on my show, which is great, but they're always pitching the book to me. I do not care about the book. I care about what value you're going to bring to my podcast. I care about what you're going to talk about. I care about what story you're going to share. I do not give a crap about your book. Like all of us here have written books too. And, you know, Alisha, you're going to be publishing soon. So at that point, like, that's not relevant to me. I care about what it is you're going to be sharing on the podcast. And yeah, plug your book at the end maybe, or at the beginning. Right. But for me, when you're going out pitching, yeah, maybe drop it slightly, but don't make the whole pitch about your book, because that's not valuable.
Unless that's what the podcast is about.
Yeah, exactly. Like, don't try to sell yourself. Try to give value in your pitch. I think that's the biggest thing. So
I'm high-fiving you.
Yeah, that is such great advice. And I do have, so as we close out today, do any of you have final parting words of advice for the authors in the audience?
I would piggyback Hailey's comment there and say, as you reach out to a show, ask yourself, how is my message going to grow and engage this person's audience? And if you approach it from that perspective, again, messaging will be better and your impact will be better, and there'll be better alignment. And I think it's the start of could be a very good relationship, and that you could work together further in the future, which is awesome. So think about that question as you make your outreach, and I think it'll go much better for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say, like, don't be discouraged if some podcasters don't have you on. There is a podcast out there that will have you on for sure. And again, yeah, crafting that message in terms of how you pitch yourself, do it from a place of being really genuine and authentic, and obviously what value you're going to add to that podcast. I think that's the best way to approach it. But at the end of the day, there is one out there for you. It may take a few messages, but you know, personally for me, I would just say that I usually take anyone who messages me. Sometimes I don't, if they're trying to sell me on something, but I welcome most people because of the nature of my show. So definitely hit me up. But again, yeah, don't be discouraged if someone doesn't take you. It's not about you. It's about the alignment, like Alisha said earlier.
Yeah. And flex your bravery muscle, you know, research the top 10, 15 podcasts that are in alignment with what you're all about. Not, like Hailey said, not just your book, but what you're all about, what you're trying to do. And then find out who the person is to pitch to. Don't just send a blanketed pitch email, right? Like, be real. I like your podcast because we'd be a good alignment because this, you know, these are my 3 bullet points, and we're like, I'd be over the moon to be on your show. Like, be real, be genuine, be authentic. When I get emails like that, I'm excited to open them, and I'm excited to talk to that person, even if they aren't just the right fit at that time. Sometimes a no isn't a no, like, it's just a no now. It might not be a no never.
Thank you so much for all of you for your time today, for your great answers to our questions. And for any audience members that have additional questions, you can reach out to any of these lovely panelists at any of the links below. So all of that information will be included in the caption. You can reach out to them. As you can see, they are friendly and not scary and happy to answer any of your questions. Thank you guys again for coming today.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
All righty. So that is the last coffee chat for 2021. Can you believe it?
What happened to this year? That's crazy. But just to think, next time we're all live and in charge with you guys, sipping our beverages of choice, it will be 2022. So stay tuned for more exciting episodes. Stay tuned for more author talk, more bookish talk, more advice. And we look forward to seeing you guys soon.
And if there are any topics that you want to hear about in 2022, or any specific people that you want to hear from, we would love to reach out to them, have them on the show, and talk about the things that you guys want to hear about.
Yeah, we can flex our muscles too.
Yes. Flex your bravery muscle and have a fantastic rest of your year.
Bye, guys.